Hi, guys. How are you guys? Good to see you. Hi, Tara. I'm guessing Green Tara is Tara. Happy to have you here. If you guys are here and you want to take a second, first of all, thank you for being here on your Tuesday evening. I'm not sure where everybody's located, but I know for some of you it's like 8 p.m. as it is for me. And then some of you on the West Coast are probably a little bit behind in time. So if you guys have a second and you want to just introduce yourselves, I'm going to get to know you guys more and more Hi, Ellen from Toronto. So nice. Me too. I don't know if you knew that, but I'm in Toronto as well. Just outside of Toronto, so Etobicoke, but Park Lawn and Lakeshore, so right by Toronto. Hi, Christy from Michigan, and Tony in Seattle. Hi, Tony. And Dan in Halifax. How's it going? Yeah, so if you guys want to introduce yourselves, because I'm sure over the next little while I'm going to see, we're doing two. Hey, Jermaine, how are you? We're doing 2 webinars a week, so I'm going to really get to know you guys over the next few weeks. And my hope is to just know everybody by name and have like an idea of your history. I go into the questions and check in the forum and everything a lot. So yeah. Hi, how's it going? SW, will you remind me your name one more time? I'm so sorry. I recognize you from the comments. I know you were in the webinar the other day, but I was thinking Shannon Vial, right? Yeah, okay, good. I just wanted to make 100% sure. I'm so good with faces and I'm not good with names. Good to see you, Shannon. Thanks. Hi, Anna. Yay, you changed your screen name. I think it was like GH something, some kind of code before. Good to see you. Cool. Okay, so we're going to talk about fearful avoidant attachment style tonight. So how I've set this up. Hi, Shayna. North Carolina. I love North Carolina. I almost went to school there years and years ago. Hi, Pedro. How's it going? Good to see you. So what I'm going to do is what I've done and what I'm trying to make sure I do is I've taken some questions and insights that group members have shared either in the discussion forum, in the Facebook group, just really common questions that I'm getting. And as well as through email. If you ever can't make a live webinar, you're welcome to submit your questions for the webinar topic through email to me at Thais at Personal Development School. And I have somebody who's going to, on my team who helps to sort of organize and just forward me those questions. And so I'll have them in the webinar if you're ever not able to attend live, which is awesome. So what I've done is I've comprised some of these questions about fearful avoidant attachment style, another couple interesting things that I've just sort of pulled up, so a little tiny bit of bonus content. And then the idea of all the webinars is to have a topic and then have a lot of your guys' questions as you attend live, because that's, whatever your questions are going to be what many people's questions are. Like I've taught a lot of classes. Hi, Mark in England. That's so cool. It must be really late there. Thanks for being here so late. I've taught lots of classes over the years. I used to, the personal development school was an in-person thing that I was running far before we ever did anything online. And with that being said, at 1 a.m., thanks for being here at 1 a.m., Mark. So with that being said, everything that was online, everything that I taught in person, when one person has questions, many people have questions. Hey, Scott from Seattle. Good to see you. So whatever your questions are, ask away as we dive into a little bit of the content today. And hi, Michael from Atlanta. I went to school and I did my undergrad in Kennesaw, Georgia. So very close to Atlanta. I actually knew somebody named Michael Edwards in Atlanta. How funny is that? Go Owls. Yeah, wow. I played soccer there at the time. So interesting. Hi, Lisa. Good to see you. I played soccer. Hi, Marcelo. So that's what took me to the US for school in the first place. So long story short, what I'm going to do is compile all the questions. And the idea of these webinars is to make sure that all of your questions are answered, all the content's here. So when you want to look back at courses, or when you're looking at a new course and you're checking out the content there, you have the live webinar about that course as well. So all the frequently asked questions are already up and over there. Yes, Marcelo. There's a funny picture of me on the web playing soccer. It is true. So funny. So, okay. So here are some of the questions I got asked so far. So thank you again all for being here. And if you're coming in late or tuning in, feel free to share your name, your information. One thing that's a really beautiful blessing when I've been teaching classes online a little bit more recently is how wonderful everybody is to one another and how supportive everybody is. I even see it in the Facebook group now, and it's just beautiful to like have that community. And it's so cool. Like I see some people being like, I want to hear an answer from a dismissive avoidance perspective. I saw somebody post that in the Facebook group, and people who are dismissive avoidance chime in and share their perspectives. And it's just such a cool way to learn and ask questions. And it's a really beautiful space for that. So again, thank you all so much for participating and just being a part of this whole process has been really, really beautiful. So here are some questions that have been asked. And I'm just going to repeat some of them. They have to do with fearful avoidant attachment style or anything related. And a few insights that people have shared that I wanted to expand on, or awarenesses that people have noticed. And I just thought it would be cool sort of bonus content to get this off and running before we dive into a little bit of the content today, and then just open up for many more questions. So somebody said to me, I don't know if other fearful avoidants suffer from this, but now I've learned the hard way how to remove myself from relationships which aren't good for me, but I have problems staying in relationships which are probably better for me. So I just want to pause there. This beautiful human being goes on to say many more things, but I just wanted to start here because as soon as she wrote this to me, I was like, oh, wow. This is something I see with fearful avoidance a lot, and I thought it should be touched on. So one thing we want to acknowledge is that our subconscious mind, and this is a great thing to know if you are a fearful avoidant or if you're the partner of a fearful avoidant, it's that our subconscious mind really works hard to maintain its comfort zone. Your subconscious mind is very survival oriented. So your subconscious isn't like, hey, let's be happy and really, dedicated and driven and determined to be happy. Your subconscious mind is very much concerned with, are we surviving? And so if you went through, a lot of trauma, and this can be trauma because your caregiver was emotionally unavailable and chaotic and not in a good place, or, physical trauma, lots of fighting, chaos, addiction, personality disorders in the household, any sorts of things like that as a child, your subconscious mind isn't like, oh, this is dysfunctional and not good. Your subconscious mind is like just trying to make it through and survive. And so years later, when you try to enter into relationships, your subconscious mind is likely to try to find people that will basically maintain that comfort zone of chaos in love. Because your subconscious is like, hey, that was really painful, but we're surviving, so this works. And so it keeps working to basically seek that out on some fundamental level. So it's very common for fearful avoidance to not feel 100% open and loving and excited about a partner who is healthy. And I see this a lot, and I've had many conversations over the years. This is not always the case, but it's definitely a pattern that's recognizable for me. And what I find is that the more you heal along your journey, the more you actually come to appreciate healthy partners in a relationship. And the less healed we are, the less, for multiple reasons, but the less healed we are, the less we feel like that safe relationship is comfortable and normal for us. It's more like, this is too good to be true, or I can't trust this, or this is boring. I hear that a lot. And, 60-year-olds who have been in and out of relationships for, a lot of their life and still sort of struggle to hold down that healthy romantic partnership because they find it boring, or, they feel like there's no spark or no drama or passion. And so that's something I see very commonly. And again, the remedy for this is to heal yourself along your journey. So your subconscious also believes, so that's one layer. A second layer is that at a deep level, fearful avoidance more than any other attachment style often believe that they are unworthy of love. And it's not necessarily a conscious thing at all. It's not that the fearful avoidant is going, oh, I'm not worthy of love. And they're thinking that and telling themselves that on a regular basis. So that might be the case. But it's more so that all of the messaging they would have gotten in their early life was that love seemed to be conditional. So maybe mom was loving when she was sober, and then when she was not sober, she was angry, and she'd get mad at you for little things or for making small mistakes, and she'd get furious and become scary. And this is part of, this dynamic that creates a disorganized attachment. So, as most of you probably know, fearful avoidant is also called anxious avoidant or disorganized attachment. And so I like to think of it from the disorganized point of view, because it's sort of like if my attachment style, let's say, is disorganized, it's like as a child, I didn't get to have a proper strategy for basically attaching to other people. It's like if somebody's a child and they want to go to their caregivers for safety, because we're wired to do this. We're wired to feel a biological fear triggered of abandonment. We're wired to need to go to our caregivers for safety, for connection. But then our caregiver we don't trust and they scare us at times. Then usually what you'll see in this child at a very early age is, they might cry and something scares them and they want to go towards their caregiver. But as they get in closer proximity towards their caregiver, they start to back away or feel funny or sometimes even yell at their caregiver or become angry or hit their caregiver. There's a lot of sort of sites of this in, the Strange Situation, those attachment style experiments done back in the Mary Ainsworth days and John Bowlby. And so what we see is that there's this like, come here, I need you. And then it's like, no, get away from me. And so there's this sort of confusion around connection. And there are those strong competing needs, right? So that translates into an adult romantic relationship big time. And basically, to a certain degree, the unhealed, fearful, avoidant attachment style is seeking out disorder in their relationship. They're seeking out to feel that their partner is, connected to them and then pulling away. And they're almost seeking out that roller coaster of events because that's what their subconscious associates for what love is. And so this is very common. And so when we go back to this woman who reached out and said, I don't know if other fearful avoidants suffer from this, but basically it's difficult for me to stay in relationships which are healthy for me. She goes on to say, more specifically, I've been with someone particularly anxious and I found myself going away from them, but I really don't want to as I know they might be better for me. Also, the more I learn about attachment styles, the more empathy I have for people who are anxious. But it's a really strong instinct which kicks in and makes me pull away from them. Do you have any advice on how to change this? Okay. So it's normal. If any of you have experienced this, you can share in the chat. I'm going to come back in a second and go through some of the questions and comments. But it's very normal naturally, and this is absolutely nothing against anxiously attached individuals. Anxious attachment individuals are usually like the sweetest and most loving and wonderful. And as a prior fearful avoidant before doing this work, I understand what it's like to feel on that anxious side of the spectrum. So zero judgment or anything there, but we have a biological survival mechanism as well. I want you to imagine, let me explain this in a story instead. I want you to imagine that, thousands of years ago when we're living in this like survival oriented world. Okay. And we have to actually be, afraid of predators and afraid of becoming preyed on. And so I want you to imagine that you see somebody like limping in the forest and they say to you, hey, come here, help me, save me, help me. And they're injured. Our biological mind, okay, our reptilian brain is going to go, that person is going to weigh on me and they're going to take from me and they're going to take my energy away and they're going to decrease my own chances of survival. And so we'll push them away or we'll run away. Obviously now, as we're more emotionally evolved human beings, this would be largely a different story in a multitude of cases, though that biological response will all still be triggered to a certain degree, but we have more of our prefrontal cortex online and making decisions. And obviously we live in a different world now, but we have this triggering response that basically says when people are too demanding, they take too much of your energy, they demand a lot from you, they make you commit. There's a biological wiring we all, even secure attachment styles, will have to a certain degree that says this person could be holding me back from my own survival. It'll be really minute at this point, but that is there. And so sometimes anxious individuals can trigger that in other attachment styles because it's like when they feel distressed, they can become a little bit clingy, they can become a little bit needy, and that can feel suffocating and overwhelming because that biological response is tripped within other individuals. So I hope that makes sense. And I just wanted to acknowledge that in this part of the question. So So this individual is basically asking, how can I sort of work through this instinct? I wouldn't work through this instinct because that instinct is sort of there to protect you. I would set boundaries with this individual. But if we are choosing relationships as a fearful avoidant, that are not healthy because we're seeking out that subconscious comfort zone, it usually means a few key underlying things. And so what I would tell you as this individual when you watch this back, because this is somebody who submitted a question ahead of time, or tell anybody struggling with this, because I bet everybody can relate to this who's in this webinar right now, is I would say it's very important to work on the things that are keeping you attached to unhealthy relationships. So ask yourself the question, what in me believes that an unhealthy relationship is more exciting than a healthy relationship? And what in me believes that I am unworthy of having a healthy relationship? And I would write out what comes up for you, and then make sure you're working through any core wounds. We keep, remember in the course for all attachment styles, we talk about when we have these original thoughts, we can find the core wound by continuously asking ourselves the rotating set of questions. What would that mean? Or what about that am I afraid would happen next? So if it's, I believe that relationships that don't have drama are not full of passion. And then what would that mean? Or what am I afraid would happen next? Well, then the relationship would die out and I would be left alone and abandoned and things wouldn't be exciting. And then, okay, and what would that mean? Okay, and then I would end up being feeling all alone in the world or feeling like I'm abandoned, period. And I'm alone and I'm abandoned are both core wounds. So if you keep asking those questions, you'll probably get to something like that. And then those are showing you the wounds that are left that you want to work through. And to work through, you want to use the vision of the future reprogramming tool to teach your brain different things. You want to use the traditional belief reprogramming tool. And when it comes to the wound of unworthy of love, and if you feel unworthy of love, usually you're going to feel unworthy of a healthy relationship and your subconscious mind will deny and push it away and avoid. But if you are feeling unworthy of love, this is because on some level you are also treating yourself as if love is conditional and running around in your life trying to earn your love or prove your worth. And because unworthiness of love is such a tough one to reprogram because it can be sort of intangible in a way, I highly recommend working on I am unworthy of love in action, with repetitive actions that reinforce your worth. So dealing with it at the action level instead of the belief or thought reprogramming levels that are talked about in the emotional mastery course and all the attachment style courses. So what is very important to do is to try to use actions, create habits in your life that show you to yourself that you are worthy. Start treating yourself like you're worthy of love. So for example, sticking to boundaries, setting boundaries ahead of time, speaking up for yourself if you feel that somebody's disrespected you in some way, having effective self-care habits, moving, taking daily small actions towards goals or things you want to create or achieve. So doing things essentially that are a demonstration of you showing up for yourself, and the messaging you are getting and giving to yourself, essentially giving to your own subconscious, is I am worthy of love. I am worthy of connection. I am worthy of taking actions in this way. Okay. So I hope that makes sense. This is like for the first set of questions here. I just want to ask you guys if you have any questions about that so far. So, hi, Christy. How are you? You are in, where are you, Christy? Clarkston. Cool. Very cool. Detroit. Yeah. Not only in love relationships. Yes. Beautiful point, Tony. This doesn't just happen in love relationships. This happens in a lot of relationships. Fearful avoidants do this. I see fearful avoidants do this in friendships the most when they go like this. They go, they make a mistake. This is all relationships. Fearful avoidants make a mistake that they feel guilty about. And then they feel so guilty that they just hide and they push people away. So for example, maybe you forget to call a friend back And then you're like, oh my gosh, my friend's going to be so mad at me because I forgot to call them back. And then you just don't call at all because you're hiding. And I see fearful avoidants do this because they experience a lot more guilt and shame than the average people as well. So a lot of that creates this need to sort of hide or withdraw or keep yourself safe. But also if the guilt is extreme, then it's like, I can't even own that much guilt. And so sometimes we'll just pull away even more. So I see that very commonly in fearful avoidance. Do you guys experience that at all? And Shannon, yes, if that's from the sound of it, when you can tell, when your conscious mind is like, this is a wonderful man, and I can tell this is a wonderful man. If that's what your conscious mind is experiencing, and then your subconscious mind is like, not interested, not attracted, because attraction is very much a subconscious process and thing, then chances are that's exactly what's happening. And that's just feedback. Like, and it could be other things too. Like, it's also okay to just not be attracted to somebody who's wonderful. That's normal. And that can be for a variety of different reasons. But if you find yourself in that situation, just look at like what you're afraid would happen with this person. What would you be afraid you wouldn't like? And just sort of show up for those different pieces there. Hi, Taddy Blair. Good to see you here. Welcome. I'm going to talk about that. That's a great question. Now my next question here. Thank you for sharing. She states something important. How would she know if it's avoidance or if she's just, this is a great question. How would she know if it's avoidance or if she is just not attracted to him? So if it's avoidance, you'll see fluctuations in your emotions. So you'll feel like you're attracted to the person, and then you'll feel like when the attraction starts happening or taking place as the fearful avoidant, the more strong the feelings are, the more you'll feel like a sense of threat. And it'll be a subtle threat, but it'll feel like this like almost tiny bit of inner hostility and fear that will cause you to just kind of push away or push back. Does that make sense? Whereas a lack of attraction, you won't have felt attracted at any point in time, really. And if the attraction rises and then as you feel closer, you feel like there's a potential for something, that commitment or vulnerability piece makes you shut off, you'll feel the juxtaposition of those two things. And that's how you can tell the difference between avoidance versus if somebody's just not attracted. That was a really great question. So Taddy says, can we talk about the fearful avoidant and physical intimacy in relationships? Being fearful avoidant, even with no background of assault, it has always terrified me. Lack of control, trust, certainty, etc. Okay, so basically intimacy for fearful avoidance can touch on many, many core wounds. And remember, we don't have to go through a core wound in a specific area for that core wound to only apply to that area. So for example, like exactly what you're saying, Taddy, you basically answered the question for yourself, but I'll go into it in a little bit more detail. Basically, is that your name? Is your name Taddy or is it Blair? Because I'm so curious. So Tatiana, that's so pretty. Okay. So Tatiana, so what happens, right, is let's give an example. Let's say that I carry a core wound of trapped, let's say, which is a common fearful avoidant core wound. So most of you are going to be able to relate to this. Hi, Rena. How are you? So let's say your core wound is feeling trapped. And let's say the core wound existed in the space of feeling trapped in your household growing up. Maybe you had really controlling parents. And so you felt trapped and constricted, not allowed to do things. When you go into your later life, you're not necessarily going to be, you can go out and leave your household and, you're not trapped in your household anymore, but that doesn't mean the wound is gone now. All that means is that you're not trapped in your household anymore. So essentially what comes out of this is that you can go into your adult life and you can feel trapped in school, in a job, in another relationship. You can feel trapped in an elevator, like whatever the core wounds are, anything that has the potential to touch it, you're going to feel something ignite. So as a fearful avoidant, it's not uncommon. Some fearful avoidants are very physical because they like connect more easily through the body in a certain way. A lot of them have a love language of physical touch, but it tends to go in like polar opposites. It's not, the patterns are in polarities, if that makes sense. And so it's not uncommon for a fearful avoidant to go, okay, well, sex or physical intimacy like if there's a vulnerability component, that feels awful. My associations and wounds around vulnerability are not good. Lack of control, scary stuff for the fearful avoidant who really, really wants to feel in control, because there was usually a huge wound around feeling out of control in childhood or early life. And just like you said, a lack of certainty. Fearful avoidants as well tend to like diminish themselves and diminish their partner. So like in their perception, like sort of have deactivating strategies towards others, but then have a tough internal dialogue inwardly. And so it's not uncommon too that the fearful avoidant, as stunning as any person can be, as gorgeous or handsome or amazing, it's also not uncommon for the fearful avoidant to have like very deep rooted issues around their physical appearance. Like I've seen over the years people who are work in the modeling industry, and you'd think, what could they possibly think is wrong with them? And they're like, I'm afraid to show my body. I'm afraid to, because that's such a vulnerable thing. And so when there's a lot of shame, which is common for the fearful avoidant, all those things together can make sex a very vulnerable and scary thing for the fearful avoidant. That was a really, really wonderful question. And so how you would work through it, to give you a good answer there too, how you would work through it is to write out, and this is like a great thing to do in any area of your life as a person on this webinar who is struggling with anything, but let's apply it specifically here. Write out all your fears. So get a pen and paper, write out all of your fears around intimacy. So too vulnerable, out of control, feeling unworthy, feeling like I'm exposed because there's so much, like I have to be naked, I have to, right? Like all these different things, whatever you can think of, write it all out. And then write out strategies and solutions in one column next to it. And then in another column, write out if you have any stories. So maybe your story is, I was speaking to a fearful avoidant the other day who's in like Hollywood and is this famous person. And she's like, I'm so afraid of exposing my body. And that was one of the things that she came up with. And she, like, it's a story, right? Like my body is not attractive. The way I look is not attractive. And we can tell these really detailed stories. Or my partner will think that I'm unlovable. My partner, when they see me in my raw vulnerability, will think that I'm unworthy of love. Although the fact that something's wrong with me will be exposed. It can, any of those core wounds can come up. So work through the story aspect and try to see, can it, is this 100% valid and true, or is this like a cognitive distortion that I'm creating? And then create strategies and solutions to buffer you in there and make you feel supported for anything else that pops in. That's a really wonderful question. And so if I scroll back up here, my response is the opposite. Isolation is a big one for me. Just dread it'll all fall apart. Yeah, I hear that, Tony. So Tony's saying, and forgive me let me make sure I understand this properly. But Tony, it sounds like you're saying your response is the opposite. You avoid things in advance, basically because you're afraid of getting into something and then having to go through the pain of it not working. And that's another really good example of like a cognitive distortion. So cognitive distortions, I have this anxiety course that I went through, like a whole bunch of traditional CBT methods. I recorded it yesterday, so it's on my mind, all the cognitive distortions. But there's all these versions of stories that we tell ourselves. We can have like all or nothing thinking. We can overgeneralize. We can talk in shoulds. We can personalize things. There's all these variations of how our mind will basically distort reality. It's very common for all human beings. And I put a whole bunch of stuff in there when the anxiety course comes out in like 2 weeks, so that you can go through and find like what your cognitive distortion patterns are. This isn't just anxiety. It's for like anything that we're struggling with. It's creating pain. But this is a really good example of one of those. I don't even want to get into a relationship because I'm assuming on some level that the relationship will end and it'll cause pain. So there's a belief in there that has to say something like, relationships will never work. And if they fail, the abandonment I won't be able to handle. So there have to be really painful beliefs in there, if you dig them up, Tony, that are basically stopping you from even moving in that direction. So get really clear, if you can, what are my beliefs about why relationships won't work? And then what are my beliefs about why it's going to be so painful when if it fizzles or if it doesn't work out, to the degree that I'm afraid to even live the experience, so I won't even go in that direction. And it's sort of like you keep yourself, if you pay close attention, in like this invisible prison. And we all have versions of this in work and career and in all sorts of our finances, all sorts of different places. So try to dig those things up and work through them. Write out, try to do reprogramming around those stories, change the stories, update your thinking to things that empower you and not things that are lying to you. Not, oh my gosh, all relationships will work out ever, but things like, if it weren't to work out, it would be the same as me being alone right now. I would be no further ahead than in this very moment. And I'd probably learn a lot along the way. And, maybe I dig deep into myself. And if I needed to heal, I have tools, I'm learning strategies, I'm growing, I'm expanding myself, and I would be capable of managing that. So you're looking for fair and balanced thoughts in the end. Okay. I hope that makes sense, but that was a great point. Let's see what else is in here. I was really struggling with that I'm worthy piece. Thank you for the additional help. Awesome. I'm so glad to hear that, Ellen. What is the best approach? Hi, Jessica. What is the best approach to reprogramming I am stupid? I feel this one multiple times a day and find it really hard to find proof of otherwise. Okay, wonderful. So first and foremost, I am stupid is usually, I can tell you to the emotional mastery course. I am stupid is usually coming in the form of like, I am foolish or I'm an idiot. Basically, it's like, if I make a mistake, like I just lost. Like I am a stupid person for making a mistake. And that's a really painful one because the reality is like we're all going to make so many mistakes all the time. Hi, Andrea. Good to see you here. We're going to make so many mistakes all the time. So what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to notice like, okay, what are the patterns that I beat myself up for? Is it specifically to career? Is it specific to your finances? Is it specific to relationships? And see if you can notice that area first, because that will help to sort of like zoom in and work on it in that area. But if it's general, and it sounds like from how you described it from multiple times a day that it's general, look beyond just like look for little tiny things about how you feel intelligent. Like, number one, that's a really smart question. And obviously, if you're here, this isn't like personal development for the faint of heart here. This is some pretty deep work. So if you came across this information and you're diving in and you're taking the courses and you're asking these insightful questions and obviously understanding the information, you're really smart in this area of your life. So there's a cool quote that I love by Einstein, and maybe some of you are familiar, but he says, if a fish judges its intelligence by its ability to climb a tree, it will spend its whole life thinking it is stupid. And we often look for intelligence in areas that we think we should have intelligence, which is just another cognitive distortion, without recognizing where our unique intelligence is. And for some of it's creative. For most of us in this area here, doing this work, it's probably in like personal development, human behavior, self-awareness, self-realization, spiritual growth, introspection. Like, there's probably a lot of intelligence there. So try to find, like when you're doing reprogramming work, look for all those different areas and look in the 7 areas of life: career, finances, mental, emotional, spiritual, physical, relationships, all relationships. And also you can track like how you're learning every day, how you're growing every day. And you can change your thinking in real time. Like when you're reprogramming at the thought level, you can change your thinking in real time by going, just because I make a mistake does not mean I'm stupid. And this is another, we call this labeling as a cognitive distortion. And it's basically mixing up our behaviors with our character traits. So it's like saying, let's say I turn in a report late. Let's say somebody turns in a report late to their boss. And they're like, oh my gosh, I'm a loser, I'm an idiot. Turning in a report late is a behavior. It doesn't make you a certain way, like in terms of a character trait. So one mistake or one behavior doesn't necessarily summarize your whole character. And so we want to be able to pull back and separate our mistakes or our behaviors from our character and who we are as human beings intrinsically and the things that we would identify our personality as being. And so it's a really good reminder when you catch yourself doing that too, to create that separation consciously. Does that make sense? To all you guys, that's a really great question. Good. Tatiana, if you feel really disconnected as well from sex or your physical body, great thing to practice is like mindfulness and body scans. So it's like you can do mindfulness meditations where you practice. Usually it's a sign of like being a little bit dissociated. And so 3 things when we feel dissociated, and this is most fearful avoidance to a certain degree are a little bit dissociated, to be quite honest. Like we could say dissociated from our feelings, from our body. And the marker would be like you don't really feel how you felt until the emotions get really strong. And it's only when emotions are really strong or when the needs are so intense that you're suddenly in touch with them. That's a good marker of being not in your body, because feelings are basically somatic sensations that occur in your body. They're the reflection of the mind in the body, essentially. So if we're out of touch, maybe you have an experience where there's a conflict and you don't realize until after you left the conflict 5 minutes later, like, hey, that one thing bothered me and I wish I said that. And you don't know your boundaries in real time, which again are like the expression of your feelings and needs. If you have some of these markers, any of you guys here, then really good things to do is like have an evening habit before you go to bed of just writing about your feelings, writing about your needs, noticing throughout the course of the day what you were feeling, what you were needing. And what this is actually going to do is teach you to get back in touch with your feelings, which will ground you back in your body. It's like a form of reassociation, essentially. So if you can sit and you can go, what are my emotions? Okay, at 12 o'clock today when lunchtime happens, what did I feel at that time? Oh, I felt a little bit nervous about the presentation I have to give after lunch. Okay, and where did I feel? You want to ask yourself, these questions are in the course, but for fearful avoidance, like, what are my feelings? Where do I feel them in my body? And this is really a great practice for anybody, not just anybody who's struggling with like feeling open to physical connection, because most of us as fearful avoidants have a history at some point in time of being a little bit disconnected from ourselves, from our feelings, until they're very strong. So really great practice. And then mindfulness body scans where you're like closing your eyes and meditating and feeling like the energy in your feet and sort of feeling like inside of your toes and trying to feel like the tingling. You can sort of create a tingling sensation if you focus your awareness in your feet, in your legs, and just sort of like getting in touch with all your body parts from the ground up. Is again, it's forcing you basically to get in touch with your body and reassociate. And that's a great prerequisite. That's an important prerequisite to feel comfortable with physical intimacy, in my opinion, period. So let's see. Dismissive deactivating strategies. Tony, I'm not sure what you meant by dismissive deactivating strategies. But fearful avoidants definitely have them as well. One thing I'll tell you, fearful avoidants, when they have deactivating strategies, is also way more than other people. So it's like this, or it's not that it's basically the deactivating strategies are a little bit stronger because they're based on like these really strong feelings that come out from like trauma and core wounds. So the emotions tend to be stronger, but the actual feeling of deactivating is unlike any other attachment style. And the reason is it's because you oscillate in polarities as a fearful avoidant. So usually what happens is you start on one side, you're like in your anxious mode maybe, or on the side of anxious. And then all of a sudden you get triggered. And now instead of just going from like, let's say you're dismissive avoidant, you go from like slightly being in a deactivating state at all times to being in a deactivating mode, or the secure who can have little deactivating strategies here and there, but doesn't experience a large fluctuation, or the anxious who can even have a little bit of deactivating strategies, but very little, and usually with the intention to still gain closeness in the long run. The fearful avoidant goes all the way from feeling their anxious side of their attachment style to their dismissive side. And that shift across, you can think of it as being across a spectrum, is so strong that it feels so intense. And then we often, as fearful avoidants, become afraid that other individuals also feel like that when they're deactivating. They don't. The level of deactivating is unique to the fearful avoidant because of that juxtaposition of going from one side of the spectrum to the other. Does that make sense, you guys? It's really important to know if you're fearful avoidant and if you're the partner of one, and that it's not about you. If it's the partner, it's about wounds and traumas that are being brought up within them and causing them to shut down out of a deep need for self-protection or self-preservation when triggered. So Anna says, I am super touchy and an absolute need of physical intimacy, but only in romantic relationships and once I feel comfortable with that person. Yeah, that's usually the most common pattern I see, followed by the other polarity that Tatiana was mentioning and talking about. Mark says, I've been subconsciously very avoidant to my wife, but I've now become very anxious, suffering with stress and anxiety, and dealing with the breakup very badly. Am I dismissive or fearful avoidant? It depends how your wife was in the situation, Mark. If your wife was, it sounds to me like you're fearful avoidant because you're experiencing both sides of the attachment spectrum. Dismissives can experience anxiety, but it's more like generalized anxiety. Like it's anxiety not about needing closeness and hungering for closeness and wondering when closeness will be next. But it can be anxiety like, oh, I feel alone. I'm feeling unsupported. What's going to happen in the future? It's more like about them a little bit. But if yours is a lot directed towards your wife, that's one good way of noticing. But if you have these polarities of being avoidant and then anxious, sounds to me like it's fearful avoidant. And also, it depends what your wife was. If your wife was secure, then you're probably fearful avoidant. And if your wife was anxious, you're probably fearful avoidant and you were always experiencing the dismissive avoidant side of fearful avoidant. If your wife was dismissive avoidant and you were dismissive, or she was like, a little bit more neutral, then it would be sort of the opposite there, if that makes sense. Because our opposing relationship attachment tends to bring out the opposite side of us on the spectrum. And it can be for other reasons too, Mark. It can be that some of your needs were not met, or you had a resentment, or you were shut down. Those aspects can play a role as well. So Tatiana says, I'm very scared of hurting a potential partner, not being able to control that I won't like it if I don't like it, or not be able to control if I'm attracted. Interesting. So to me, I hear super loudly that here I am, the fearful avoidant. I'm just going to set the example here because I'm sure everybody can relate to this so much. It's here I am, the fearful avoidant. I'm experiencing fear around sex or intimacy. And before I can even, it's like before I even think about myself and am present with myself in the process of moving through that if I choose to, instead I'm worrying more about the other person and how they're doing. And so remember, Tatiana, to be in touch with your feelings and your needs first. It's really, I hate to use such a cliche example, but it's like the oxygen mask thing on the airplane. It's like we truly have to operate from, it's part of the healing of the fearful avoidant is to be accountable and aware about your feelings, your needs, your boundaries first. And we need to be operating out of that in order to partake in a healthy relationship, because as all of the fearful avoidants in here know, it's very easy to be disconnected from your own feelings and needs, not speak up for them, feel resentful. It boils up and all of a sudden it comes out in you just leaving a relationship all of a sudden, seemingly out of the blue, you shutting down, you getting angry and expressing, criticism harshly, all sorts of different versions. So it's really important to note. Please slow down and repeat the paper exercise. What was the paper exercise about? The paper exercise was about going like this. In one column, writing all your fears about a situation. So let's use the analogy of sex. In one column, write all your fears about sex, all the things that come up. In another column, write strategies or solutions to work through those fears or make yourself feel supported and insulated around those fears. And in the last column, to work through any stories that might exist. I would actually do them in reverse, the stories first, and then the strategies and solutions. But let's say the fear is, I hear this a lot from people. They'll see that something's wrong with me when they fully see me at my most vulnerable. And usually it's just this core wound of something's wrong with me. So, you would ask yourself, can I 100% know that that's real and valid? And do I have anything that can disprove that thought? Can I come to a fair and balanced thought perspective? And so, is it possible that somebody could find me worthy of love and not see me differently and still like me and so you're working through the story and equilibrating it. And then you're moving into the solution. So how do I make myself feel as comfortable as possible? Maybe if it's about sex, I make sure I know somebody for a very long time and I have many discussions about it before even going there physically, so that I feel really safe, really connected, really comfortable. And I would highly advise that for anybody who's having any fears or struggles about sex, is there's no need to rush into anything. So super important. These are great questions. Thank you everybody here for so much vulnerability in these questions. So, hi, Andrea. I have been applying everything you've taught me over the past 5 months. RELP is completely different. It really, really does work. I noticed deactivating strategies I am doing. That's wonderful. I'm so glad to hear that. And when you do the deactivating strategies, this is for everybody. This is actually a great, wonderful, amazing point. So thank you for saying this, Andrea. If you notice yourself doing deactivating strategies, don't just try to stop the deactivating strategies and repress it or just change the behavior. Go underneath it and ask yourself, what am I afraid of? What is the wound that causes me to use the deactivating strategy? So go a level deeper and try to get in touch with what's underneath it. What's the core wound that causes me to deactivate? And then work on that. And we can work on those wounds through reprogramming. But I almost prefer, instead of reprogramming, like self-nurturing integration, almost like inner child work, but not in an inner child visualization way, in a way where we recognize that our wounds are also largely caused by deeply unmet needs, and we have to nourish those needs back to wholeness again. So for example, if I notice I'm deactivating, and then I notice I'm deactivating because I'm getting too close to somebody, and when I get too close to somebody, I feel vulnerable and like they could hurt me. So then when I feel emotionally vulnerable, I push them away. Then I want to go and say, okay, what am I afraid of happening that causes me to deactivate? Okay, I've recognized the fear. I'm afraid of being hurt by somebody and being vulnerable. And so then I want to meet those needs to myself. So if I'm afraid of somebody moving away from me, how would I be okay anyways? What needs would I have to meet to be okay? Nourish myself in the sense of, even if I'm alone, I'm okay alone. Nourish the relationship to myself, self-connection, so I'm not feeling dependent on somebody else in the situation and like I have to hold on and like, oh my gosh, if I'm receiving from them, I'm terrified of losing it, and so it's about going underneath there and getting clear about what the needs are that cause us to activate or deactivate, for us fearful avoidance in here. And then creating strategies and healthy solutions to nourish what's going on beneath the surface. And again, you can still reprogram at the same time. So amazing question and insight. Thank you for sharing that, Andrea. My best friend is fearful avoidant. He hated touch for years, even hugs. He was tactile sensitive. He went for reflexology to work on it. Discovered touch hunger. Now he loves it. That's really beautiful. That's a great form of what we talk about in one of the courses as being exposure response therapy. So exposure response is like us exposing ourselves to our fears or to the things that we're repulsed or afraid of, and then intentionally lacing new positive emotional associations to those things. So it's action plus emotion, right? And we do that repetitively, and we use those guiding principles that our subconscious mind is reprogrammed through repetition plus emotion. So by bringing those things together, because reflexology was probably a pleasant experience, he's exposing his subconscious mind to the fear, getting new emotional associations that are like, hey, this is actually really nice. And that's breaking down the repetition over time so that he likes that hunger, he likes the touch. That's a really cool thing. What a great example. Thank you about the quote. I agree with that too. Shannon says, talking about I think it was the Albert Einstein quote you're talking about, Shannon, the I am stupid wound that was mentioned. And I like what Shannon said too. If you are not making mistakes, you're playing it too safe. Okay, cool. So another question here is, Tatiana points to the fear of hurting the other, which, to be honest, is likely to happen. How do we pass that fear? What do you make hurting another person mean about you? And work on that, okay? Because we're going to hurt people. And most of the time, we're hurting people because we have no idea and we don't mean to. Like, think of, you do something and maybe there's like you get lost there's a miscommunication. You say something because you misinterpret a question. Like, there's so many things that are out of control. And there's another good quote. I think it's like Buckminster Fuller. No, it's actually Ram Dass, I think. And he says, I am responsible for what I say, not how you perceive it. And it's true, right? We can handle our words and our communication with care, but we can't be perfect. And so when we go to the extreme of fearing so much, and this is very common for fearful avoidance. I still work on this a little bit, to be quite honest. When we worry too much about other people's feelings, it's usually because we have a deep underlying wound of like, if we hurt someone, what are we? And a lot of fearful avoidance have a core wound of like being bad. Usually fearful avoidance because you were punished a lot in childhood or yelled at or acted like you were really bad. And usually there was some kind of walking on eggshells in childhood for most fearful avoidance, or in a relationship later in life. If your attachment style developed into fearful avoidant, usually you're so afraid of being bad because it came with punishment. It came with total lack of safety. It came with all these things that were terrifying. And so we get super hyper attuned about not hurting anybody. And it's important to work through, because that can be its own paralysis and that can be its own detriment to our relationships, because it can impact our ability to show up authentically, right? If I'm always walking on eggshells, I'm not even giving myself fully. I'm not giving myself vulnerably and in my wholeness and in love. And that can be a limitation on any relationship. Does that all make sense? You guys are like, I love this because you guys are asking these amazing questions. Feelings are somatic sensations. Feelings are basically a reflection of the mind in the body, Tony. Thais, is it normal to feel very anxious to do conflict resolution for something that's not a big deal? Yes, it is normal to feel very anxious about conflict resolution. It is scary stuff, you guys. We spent our whole childhood, basically all of us, feeling like we always lost in conflict. Our parents always won. We felt helpless, small, all kinds of stuff that wasn't fun. And so the act of taking a new approach and exposing yourself to conflict is not easy. But once you do it once, twice, 3 times, it just starts to get so much easier. I have seen over the years, like some of the most dismissive, avoidant, conflict-fearing individuals ever who like are superstars at conflict communication now and just love it, because deep down underneath those fears, we all desire and crave to express ourselves, to connect from a space of vulnerability. It's just that we have all these layers of stored associations that say it's not safe, it's not okay, it doesn't work well, we end up losing, it's painful. But the conflict communication tools are deeply, deeply designed. And this was the second course I recorded yesterday, was conflict resolution and communication. That's like very in depth with like for when dealing with very challenging people, all these extra sort of support tools and really intense things. But even just in the webinar that I recorded, or the things that are in the courses, the attachment style courses, those are designed enough to the point where with certainty you're insulated from getting into that space of the pain of conflict. So you said, I'm upset that my neighbor keeps leaving lawn clippings on my sidewalk, even after I've asked her to stop. I feel like I'm being petty, but I take her actions as disrespectful and inconsiderate. So say that in your kind conflict communication skilled way. So don't say, hey, you're disrespectful and inconsiderate. Say, hey, I'm just coming back to you. I wanted to mention again that I keep seeing your lawn clippings on the driveway. I'm not sure if you forgot or what was going on, but to me, I feel disrespected when that happens. In my reality, I experience that as feeling disrespected and sort of dismissed, or like, what I expressed to you wasn't important, and I would love to get along as neighbors. And it's really important to me that we can do so. And so do you think you could try to take a little more accountability and remember, I know we can't be perfect, but I would really appreciate if you could just take a little bit of energy to try to be better with it. And if you go from that space and you're confident and open, I would be absolutely shocked. 95 to 99% of people, I'm making up numbers, I'm sort of joking around, but the vast, vast, vast majority of people are going to respond positively to that. And if they don't, then you're probably dealing with somebody who's got some really, really tough stuff going on. So good question. Yeah. So Mark, good question, Jermaine. So Mark, you said yes, wife is anxious. So yeah, for sure you're fearful avoidant. For sure. Because what's happening, right, is you're a little on the dismissive side when you're with the anxious, which is normal. The fearful avoidant usually polarizes to becoming more dismissive when they're with somebody anxious. And then when you're out of the relationship, you're now experiencing your anxious side, 100%, like textbook fearful avoidant. So thanks for sharing that. Jessica, I don't necessarily feel unintelligent. I guess it's more feeling ashamed of making a small mistake and noticing certain things or showing up for people or not showing up for people in the way I think I should have. So remember, like, I would just do your work then around like making mistakes. I would just do some thought upgrading when you notice it and just reinforce to yourself, like a mistake doesn't make me a bad person. It doesn't make me unworthy of love. This is how I'm going to learn and grow, and just do a little bit of repatterning work around your beliefs about making mistakes. And what do you make it mean? Like I hear when I read this, to be honest, is that you have a really big core wound around feeling bad. And I would do a lot of reprogramming work around feeling bad. It's like, I didn't show up the way I think I should have. I'm bad. I make a mistake. I'm bad. Like, Jessica, I hear, and I'm making an assumption from just your message. So forgive me if I'm off, but I hear that somebody in your life at an early age gave you a really hard time about little tiny mistakes all the time, for not doing enough, not being enough, not showing up in a certain way. And you got either punished for it or love withheld or shut down, or somebody was like hypercritical somehow. And so I hear that like showing up in your behavior now, because it sounds like a pattern that I see quite often. So you can do that from an inner child perspective too, like nurture yourself. When you see yourself make a mistake, you can say like, hey, I'm a human being. It's okay to be a human being and make mistakes. And you want to start giving to yourself what you didn't get from your parents. So we become our own parents. So important. Ellen, 5 weeks ago, I split with my boyfriend of 9 years. I hope that's helpful, Jessica. Let me know. 5 weeks ago, I split with my boyfriend of 9 years. I'm fearful avoidant, and I think he is also fearful avoidant, but more dismissive. We're both hypervigilant. Our relationship has been super combustible throughout. Okay, so 2 fearful avoidance. And yes, Shannon, fearful avoidants are very commonly codependent. The essence of codependency is like I am more in touch and aware with your feelings and needs than my own. And I think that yours are more important, and that I have to earn your love through putting yours first, if that makes sense. Ellen says, the last fight came, not surprisingly, as we started talking about living together. And normally I get super anxious and chase him out of his cave. This is the first time I felt like maybe it's good to be apart. Now he is sending out feelers. But I'm seriously wondering how well we can do without a lot of work on both of our ends. There's still a lot of love there, but we're worn out from the roller coaster. 2 fearful avoidance together is a roller coaster. It's really hard, but both people love so deeply and selflessly, and then can't sustain it because those are unhealthy patterns to not take yourself into consideration. And then the other side of the spectrum comes out where you have to shut down and become selfish and survive. And it can be really challenging that way. So any thoughts on how realistic it is to be able to make this work? Knowing all this attachment information almost makes it harder to go back in. I see what we're up against. He's always been super skeptical and resistant to inner work. Okay, so here's what I would do. If you're going to go back and engage ahead of time, write all the things that you need to fix in the relationship in order to make it work. What are the patterns? What are the things you're running into? What are your triggers? What are his triggers? What triggers them? This is great for anybody who's like contemplating getting back into a relationship or just general work to do. Your triggers, this person's triggers that you're considering being back together with. What were the patterns? What would you do that triggered each other? We all have patterns in relationships, which are like, I like to think of patterns as like, I'll give an analogy. 2 people. One person feels unheard easily. One person has an abandonment wound. Every time one person who feels unheard and suffers over that tries to talk about something, their partner feels like they're about to be abandoned because there's conflict and pushes the person away or shuts off. And then the other person feels more unheard. And then And so they get more angry, and then the other person's like feeling more abandoned because they're getting more afraid. And so you see how we can get into these vicious cycles? We all have these like cyclical patterns in relationships. Write those down. Identify your needs, identify this person's needs as best you can. We will be making assumptions to a certain degree, Ellen, but it's better to make assumptions and clarify with that person about your assumptions than it is to just be locked in the dark, right? And then next to all of those things you've identified, create strategies. And then when you have the conversation at some point, ask this person, are you open and willing or able to commit to working through these things? These are the patterns I think I've identified. What do you see in here? What do you recognize? Would you add anything? And, I think these are the things that we would need to work through. Do you have any strategies you would want to add? And if you can both make a commitment to doing that and both have a transparent conversation about it, I would try it again. It sounds like there's a lot of love. But if this person's resistant, if you can't trust this person to do it and only you are doing the work, then your best track is going to be just to focus on your healing and to prepare yourself to fall back in love with yourself and get rooted and connected and be open for the next healthiest relationship. But I would honestly do the work, Ellen, no matter what. Do the work, get clear, identify, just to bring awareness to the situation, and then create strategies. And those can be for your next relationship. Those can be just to reflect and introspect on those aspects of the relationship and just to clarify everything there. So I'm going to answer these other questions. There's quite a few. And then I'm going to go back to a couple of the other questions that people submitted ahead of time. And then I'm going to end at like 9:15, 9:20, if you guys are okay to stick around a little bit late. Thanks for being here with me. So these are great questions. So Tony says, working with deactivating strategies, can you differentiate between reprogramming and nurturing strategies? Yes. Excellent. So reprogramming is basically using repetition plus emotion in some form at either the belief, thought, or action level to create new patterns in your subconscious mind. And what you're essentially doing is you're firing and wiring new neural pathways that strengthen over time as the old ones atrophy. So let's say, for example, another thing about reprogramming that it does is it retunes your reticular activating system into seeing new things. So your reticular activating system, or RAS, is like the perceptual filter of your reality. So let's say, for example, that I have a core wound around being not good enough. Okay. So let's pretend this is the big core wound. I feel not good enough. And I worked on this one personally. I used to feel extraordinarily not good enough. And now I feel neutral. Like I feel like in this like open space. Where I know I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to forget things sometimes, or, not set boundaries at times, or like just things. But it doesn't ignite a wound any longer. Does that make sense? That's the ideal that we're trying to get to. We're not trying to feel like we're the best person on the planet. We're supposed to feel like, hey, I am in a fair and balanced perspective where I can see, hey, that was a mistake, or hey, I didn't do well enough here. It doesn't mean I'm not good enough. It means I can improve and I can recognize my wins at the same time. So balanced perspective, right? So with reprogramming, it's using, so let's say the wound is not good enough and we're doing the belief level. I'm going to every day in the morning or in the evening, especially when I'm producing alpha or theta brainwaves. So first thing when I wake up or last thing before I go to bed, or through listening to binaural beats or something of that sort, I'm going to sit and I'm going to write out 10 to 15 reasons I am good enough. And it doesn't matter how big or small those reasons are. I could be at rock bottom in my life and I could write out, I'm good enough because I cooked myself a healthy dinner. I'm good enough because I did something different today. I smiled at somebody today. I like little tiny things. It actually doesn't matter what you're picking as long as it elicits a tiny emotional response. It feels real for you and it's true. And as long as it like deeply resonates, essentially. Okay. So you pick 10 to 15 things, repeating over time, looking for new things every day if you can, no matter how big or small. The idea is that you're using repetition plus emotion to teach your brain and to fire and wire new neural pathways. Not that you find all these pieces of proof to yourself in one sitting that you're the most amazing thing on the planet, because it's not going to work, because it's not how human beings operate or are designed. So you would use repetition plus emotion, pick 10 to 15 things on a daily basis. And what happens too is your reticular activating system tunes into whatever it's focusing on through your conscious mind. So have you ever had the experience of like you're buying a new car and you've never noticed this car on the road, but suddenly you see the car everywhere? That's your RAS. You're giving input and it's redirecting the focus. So what will naturally happen when you're doing reprogramming is not only will you fire and wire these new neural pathways around being good enough, and the old painful self-diminishing pathways will start to atrophy, but at the same time, your RAS will start to look for where you're good enough and start to acknowledge your wins and recognize them. And some people ask me, will it get to the point where I can program myself into a narcissist? Absolutely not. You won't ever go too far in the other direction. All you'll find is at best you're in a healed space and you can recognize both sides. Your brain is naturally wired to look at negative things more than positive. It's a survival orientation. So it's good to always be balancing it out so you're staying rooted and balanced. Now, nurturing strategies is basically about identifying the unmet needs that show up and that are causing the pain, and then meeting those needs through yourself and meeting those needs with compassion, with generosity, with kindness. So if it's I'm feeling there's this unmet need of supportiveness, I might ask myself, okay, what does support mean to me? And what are some strategies I can start making myself feel supported? And that can be complimenting myself. That can be taking part in self-care rituals. That can be, not shaming myself if I make a mistake. So one is about changing the belief patterns that are running in your subconscious mind and in your internal dialogue. And the other is about identifying and recognizing those unmet needs and meeting them intentionally for yourself. Excellent question, Tony. Jessica says, it comes up a lot when thinking about my DA partner. Every time he pulls away, I feel ashamed for not being able to meet his needs and avoid triggering him. I obsess over the last things I said. Okay, so Jessica, when you beat yourself up, how do you think it serves you at a subconscious level? Your mind, everything we do is a subconscious strategy to get specific needs met. So if you keep beating yourself up, it's because subconsciously there's some kind of belief association that says, if I beat myself up, I'll remember next time, or I'm more likely to remember next time, or things like that. It's the opposite, just so you know. If you check out the guilt and shame reprogramming course, we have something called the ironic processing theory, and it's this idea that if I say to you, don't think of the pink elephant, what happens, right? We all are like, oh, pink elephant in your mind. And it's because your subconscious doesn't really read through negatives very much. So instead, if I'm saying, oh my God, don't ever say that to him again, don't ever do that again, oh my gosh, this is so messed up, why did I do that? And I'm ruminating about that thing, I'm actually, through repetition and emotion, programming the significantly greater likelihood of repeating my mistakes instead of correcting them. So when this happens, so that you're not programming yourself to hurt somebody or make mistakes that you're going to then feel badly about, instead ask yourself, what is the solution to this problem? And let me focus on feeding that next time and visualizing about that. And when a situation comes up, let me visualize all the little nuances of how I would rather deal with it instead. And now you're shifting your brain from feeding the problem to finding and supporting the solution. And it'll still get your brain that same underlying need met, which should be really useful. And I would also say, you're worrying about this person's feelings. Make your feelings and needs matter equally to this other person. Okay. Good questions in there. Hi, Natasha. So Natasha says, are fearful avoidance the only ones that end a relationship all of a sudden? Does this include ghosting, or is ghosting more of a dismissive avoidant behavior? So I would say ghosting can be both. But I would say slightly more is a fearful avoidant behavior. The reason is that fearful avoidants are like super sensitive to guilt and shame and hurting other people and feeling like if they hurt somebody, they're going to get punished or they're bad or they're going to lose their worth. So oftentimes fearful avoidants will ghost because they are trying to avoid feeling guilty, basically. So I see this. Now, fearful avoidants don't do this they tend to do it particularly with dating. It's not something I see very often in other areas, like friendships and things like that, though it can happen, but very rarely. It's usually when there's some kind of oh my gosh, dating, romantic connection, something where we're using our adult romantic relationships to supplement for our caregivers, because we naturally project our caregiver relationships onto our romantic ones. But in the case of fearful avoidance ending relationships all of a sudden, these are great questions, by the way. In the case of fearful avoidance ending the relationships all of a sudden, it's usually because there is a massive buildup for prolonged periods of time of unmet needs. And so there's unmet needs and lack of expression of feelings. And this happens 1, 2, 3, 7, 10, 15 times. The fearful avoidant doesn't speak up because they don't want conflict. They want to maintain that love. And then all of a sudden they hit their cap where there's such an imbalance. And that's what conflict is. Conflict is a perception of imbalance across space, time, energy, or matter. And so we hit a cap, and then it's like, I've given so much, and then I'm not getting anything in return, and then sort of shut down all of a sudden. And so what this is a symptom of is a chronic lack of expression of your feelings, needs, and boundaries over time. And so if you find yourself doing that, or if you're with somebody that's done that, those are the things you want to be aware of. So if it's you want to start working on expressing your feelings and needs more. Okay. And yeah, somebody said, sending love to you, Jessica. Tatiana said that. And so that was really sweet, because I hear that too. Jessica was giving herself a hard time. Be kind to yourself, Jessica. Be gentle to yourself. That's a prerequisite for healing, all you guys. Literally, prerequisite for healing is kindness and gentleness and being courteous towards ourselves. Necessity. You want to heal on this journey? That's what you want to do. And beating ourselves up only makes us more likely to keep failing at healing and keep repeating mistakes. Okay. Okay, so let me see here. Where were we? You guys are asking such great questions. Yeah, Tatiana, you hear that, right? That's typical fearful avoidant, right? About childhood stuff and making mistakes, not being safe. Can you talk a little bit more about the relationship between 2 fearful avoidants versus 1 fearful avoidant and 1 dismissive avoidant? For sure. So 2 fearful avoidants, usually when they meet, it's like fireworks. It's like they have like this great capacity to be very present, very open, connect very deeply. And usually the first couple months or few weeks at least, there's like a tremendously deep and powerful connection. And then as the feelings get stronger, both fearful avoidants start to get afraid of that vulnerability and the commitment. And then that's when it starts to get messy. And so fearful avoidants will both experience being on the anxious side and the dismissive avoidant side. They sort of pinball around. So 1 week could have the male fearful avoidant. Let's say 2 males in a relationship. One male is experiencing the dismissive avoidant side. The other male is experiencing the anxious side. And then the next week, suddenly they've switched sides and one's anxious and one's dismissive. So what happens, right, is that you'll shift back and forth in the attachment style spectrum. And there's usually a little bit more distrust, a lot more chaos, definitely a roller coaster, a lot more emotional intensity from both ends, both sort of like being codependent, self-sacrificing, meeting the other's feelings and needs, ignoring their own, then feeling frustrated, projecting it back onto the other person. These are sort of the patterns we'd see, versus with a fearful avoidant and dismissive avoidant. Usually we'll see that the dismissive avoidant stays dismissive and the fearful avoidant starts shifting onto the anxious side of the attachment spectrum for the majority of the relationship, until the fearful avoidant gets deeply triggered. And then when they're really triggered or they're frustrated or upset, they become really dismissive avoidant because they're mad, they're hurt, they're upset. All that trauma comes up, those feelings. And then they like push the dismissive avoidant away really hard. And then the dismissive avoidant will sort of, they won't participate to the same degree in the volatility the majority of the time. Sometimes they will, but it's a lot more rare by comparison. They tend to sort of avoid conflict, or at least want conflict to be over faster. And there are less roller coasters in this relationship, although they will occur. And you won't see as much vulnerability at any point in time from the dismissive avoidant. Maybe in the early stages a little bit, in the honeymoon phase or in the first, few months of dating, but the fearful avoidant will still feel like they've kind of hit a wall. They don't have somebody who's like super emotionally available to them, the way the 2 fearful avoidants would be. Does that make sense, you guys? It's a really good question, Tatiana. Anna, I've been to therapy. I did inner child work with some yogis. Cool. That's awesome. I tend to have anxiety that can turn into panic attacks when I think the person I'm seeing is seeing someone else. How do you overcome that? Okay, so it's very fearful avoidant. So this is a great question that I'm going to give you a really detailed answer for. And so, okay, so number one, there's a wound around distrust. So number one, when you see this, and this is common for fearful avoidance, what's happening is you're having a cognitive distortion of assuming that somebody is seeing somebody else, right? So there's an assumption, because the reality is you can't 100% know unless you ask, right? Or unless there's clarity or somebody tells you. So you don't want to notice how, like, when that happens, your mind suffers over a story. It's almost like a movie you play out in your mind. And in the movie, you see them seeing someone else and all these different things, and it's really painful. So number one, you just want to have the awareness that this isn't necessarily 100% truth. And if you need clarification, then that would be a great thing to ask for, depending on like the boundaries of the relationship. If you've been seeing somebody for one date, obviously that's different than you're seeing somebody for 6 months. So now the really important part in here is to ask yourself, and you're going to find a whole bunch of golden nuggets in this. You want to ask yourself the question, what do I make it mean if somebody I'm seeing is seeing somebody else? Okay. And the level of pain we experience is often in great correlation, or is like almost directly proportionate to the level of stories and wounds we have at the subconscious level in an experience. So for example, let's say one person, let's say the dismissive avoidant. Let's say somebody's a dismissive avoidant and they think of somebody seeing somebody else, and they might make it mean the relationship's not going to work. I'm going to be on my own. That's it. And so that would be painful for the dismissive avoidant, but that would be a different type of pain than for a fearful avoidant who likely has this. Our connection meant nothing. I'm unworthy of love. I'm unimportant. I don't matter. I never mattered. I'm abandoned. I'm not good enough and somebody's better. I can't trust, or men, women can't be trusted. And so see how there's like many layers of stories in there? The more stories we have, the more pain will exist. And so what we want to be able to do is work through those, because it's not fair to yourself, for example, to say or to believe that if somebody's seeing somebody else, that takes away my worth. Right? But see how the mind does that? It plays that trick. So you want to work through all those layers of stories and then identify what those needs are as well. What do you need? What unmet needs did you have from childhood that make you fear that so much, or that are making that distrust come up to such a strong degree? And it could be, I didn't get consistency. I didn't get trust. I didn't feel like I could trust people. And how we heal that relationship, seriously, as fearful avoidance, is we heal the trust relationship within ourselves first. The fearful avoidance struggles with trust wounds with others because we betray our own trust so much by consistently acting as if we are unworthy of love and putting other people's feelings and needs so far beyond our own, and betraying and abandoning ourselves. And so we start meeting our own needs, being consistent with our feelings, showing up for our feelings and our boundaries, expressing, connecting to ourselves, all those things. And that will also help to heal the trust from the needs side. Okay. So I'm going to answer one last question on here. I've been answering them in order, and then I'm going to copy and paste. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks for seeing that. I appreciate it. You're amazing, Andrea. That's wonderful. It's so fun to see the progress. No, that's awesome. Great job. That means you're doing the work, Andrea. That's what that means. So I'm going to copy and paste any questions I haven't answered. And we're going to start them off in the next webinar as well. So if you have questions you want to go through or anything like that, put them in here. These are great questions. This takes any course content that I can think of and put in there, and all the patterns and all the things. And I think it just like deepens for all the frequently asked questions, so people can come here and check out the webinars and see all these like real life experiences that I'm sure anybody who's fearful avoidant will relate to so many of these questions. So somebody said to me, I had an emotion flashback. This is a question I got submitted. I had an emotion flashback, and the story I was creating was so real. I felt like I needed love more than anything, and yet I wanted to run and be alone, and because I was so upset. Can you go over establishing what is real and what is perceived? The story felt more real than truth. I convinced myself I was unloved, and I never would leave and I never would feel love from my partner. But he said he would do anything in his power to meet me where I needed him to. So this is a great question, actually, because it touches on something really important. I want to make a really strong distinction. I think I say this in the emotional mastery course, but in case I didn't, I think I do, but just in case, this is a very important distinction. In case this is one of those things that you listened partway over and didn't hear fully, or you were cooking at the time while your thing is playing on your computer, whatever it is, make sure you remember this. And I would almost like write this down and keep this forever. Your emotions are always 100% valid. Okay. But the content that produces them may be completely invalid. It can be valid or invalid. So for example, your emotions, let's start with your emotions are 100% valid. Your emotions are real neurochemical experiences. Nobody can tell you your emotions are wrong. What you're feeling is exactly what you're feeling. And the level of intensity of the feelings is related to the level of painful stuff that's underneath it, the content that's creating it. And so your emotions are your feelings. It doesn't matter if you're 10 out of 10 emotional because you just spilled water. If you truly believe that you spilling water makes you unworthy and you're going to be alone for the rest of your life, then if those beliefs are what exist in your subconscious mind and spilling the water happens to trigger that, you're going to feel, it's not about the spilling of the water, it's about the meaning you give to it at the subconscious level because of the stored painful wounds that are being ignited and brought to the surface. And that's what your emotions are giving you feedback for, is they're giving you feedback about your internal reality, not your external reality. They're giving you the feedback about, I'm believing that I'm unworthy of love and going to be alone for the rest of my life. They're not giving me feedback about the water being spilled. So it's really important to note your emotions are 100% real. They're there to help you, to assist you. They can also be giving you feedback if you have deeply unmet needs. Okay. But we're going to leave that for now. Deeply unmet needs could be like, I feel unsupported from my partner or disconnected. I need connection. Right. And I can ask for it. And the suffering, the excruciating emotion, though, is when I give that all this meaning. So let's say I feel disconnected from my partner. We've both had a long week and we haven't gotten to spend much time together. And let's pretend, right? And then if I make that mean that we're going to end the relationship, he wants to be with somebody else, I could make it mean all these painful things, and that can be what's really, really difficult. So here, the answer to this question is that you want to make a strong distinction between your emotions being valid. Your emotions will always be valid versus your emotions being produced by content underneath. And that's what you want to be questioning. So never question your emotions. Your emotions are always right. Okay. They're always helping you, assisting you, guiding you on your journey. But the content underneath is what we need to be able to question. So when this woman, for example, said she felt all this pain, and she said, I felt like I would never feel love for my partner. And yet he said he would do anything in his power to love me and meet him where I needed him to. So she has proof of otherwise. And if we can find one strong contradictory piece of evidence to the story we're believing, we know the story is not an absolute truth, which means we then want to get on the bandwagon of trying to come back to a fair and balanced perspective with practical, rational thoughts. And when we have these really strong emotions like this, these really strong emotional outputs, this is a symptom of usually some kind of core wound that existed in childhood that was congruent with whatever this flashback was about. Okay, where there was some moment in time, for example, that this woman would have felt that she was never going to feel love from her parents. So I would never feel love from my partner. It was probably at some point in time I would never feel love from my parents. And that's something triggered that memory. And those feelings came rushing to the surface. And then they get reprojected onto our current situation. And that's usually what happens when we have these sort of flashbacks and these strong feelings arise and we feel like we don't have power over them. And that's usually where that's actually coming from. So does that make sense, you guys? These are wonderful questions and wonderful participation. I love doing these. Like I love doing these webinars. Okay, cool. So, you guys are so sweet. Okay, so I am going to copy and paste a bunch of these questions. And I think somebody just asked here. Also, I tend to, yeah. So I think somebody just asked if you can re-listen to this webinar. Absolutely. It's in the members forum. I know somebody was like, there's a lot in here. Yeah, there is a lot in here. What's cool is this was just, I was going to go through a whole bunch of things, and I just took your questions today and just answered them live. Because my favorite way of honestly creating and producing and sharing content is just through like on the spot live questions, because these are real life experiences, and because I've worked with clients for so long, so that's also the sorry, I'm sitting like a child all cross-legged. That's usually the way I'm used to communicating about stuff. So I have just copied and pasted these questions, so I have them. And let me just double check that I do. I just want to say thank you guys so much. These are like, I literally can't say how excited I get to do webinars and just connect and share and chat about this stuff that I'm so friggin' passionate about. You guys are so incredible. Amazing questions, amazing shares, amazing support for each other already. I just see you guys like sending love to each other and being so kind, and all of that. And again, if you didn't have your questions answered today, I'm keeping track of them. I'm gonna there will always be a way that they're getting answered, either in the next forum, on the Facebook page, or in videos. And if so, I'll cite that, hey, this is a question from the webinar. And yeah, thank you guys so much for being here. I hope you have an amazing evening. And nice, guys. Okay, thank you so much. Have a great evening. See you soon. Oh, next webinar, Saturday, 3 p.m. Eastern. 3 p.m. Eastern. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. So Saturday, 3 p.m. Eastern. I hope. Yeah, okay, perfect. Bye, guys. See you.